Itch it up, my selector.
Due to some violent content, parental discretion is advised.
I know you gonna dig this.
Happy Saturday. It is another edition of Sucker Punch. It is Saturday, January 25, 2025. And we're back with another one. And when I say we, I am, of course, talking about myself, yours truly, Maestro Milcar, Maestro en Espanol, with my brother from another, Mr. Joe Habib from Boston. We're at you live again with a Sucker Punch show. And look, for those of you who don't know, Sucker Punch is a show where we oftentimes do get into the X's and O's of things, but other times we talk about the business of boxing. We talk about kind of the political maneuvering in the sport of boxing, and of course, debates in the sport of boxing. And we got one that's kind of come out recently, Joe. You brought this to my attention. There's dispute yet again about who is pound for pound number one in the sport. Now, people have their different ideas about what pound for pound is. At some point in this show, I will give you my understanding of pound for pound. Joe, you can give me your understanding of pound for pound. But typically, pound for pound, in general, I think there is consensus around the idea that it's when you're comparing boxers across weight divisions. And we can get into further details about how those comparisons are made, constructed, contrasted, explained, etc. But that's generally the idea of pound for pound. And typically, the three fighters right now that are mentioned in these pound for pound debates are, of course, Naoya the Monster Inoue, Alexander Usyk, and of course, Terrence Bud Crawford. I think most people that do these lists have one, two, three involving those three particular combatants. Of course, these guys will never fight each other. That's kind of the issue with pound for pound. But there is a little bit of a debate in terms of who's number one, who's number two, who's number three. And Joe, I'm going to take it right over to you right now. Talk to me, Joe, about this whole debate that's kind of resurfaced following Inoue's last performance against an unheralded late replacement in Kim, who he knocked out quite brutally in the fourth round of their fight yesterday morning. Go for it.
Well, as you know, you've been talking to me for years about boxing, and you know I'm not huge on these lists. But one thing I do like to talk about sometimes is like who is the best, right? I just care about the number one. I'm not one of these guys that goes crazy with the lists and has all these criteria and go overly analytical with it, right? It's not one of my priorities when I talk about boxing is who's like who's number one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10. But I think it's interesting debate when you look at like who's the guy. Like I only care about who's the guy. And I know everyone has their criteria, and a lot of this is subjective, and it's always going to be subjective. But sometimes when people explain themselves, everyone has a right to their own opinion. But I also have a right to my opinion of your opinion, right? And sometimes people say crazy things like, I was on Twitter today, and someone was talking about Usyk saying, "Well, he only beat 4 Brits," and I'm like, "Well, if you look at the current top 10 in the heavyweight division right now, there's actually 4 of those of the 10 are Brits, and there's not one American in there, and there's another European one in there. So like what even does that mean, and why does that even matter, and what significance does that play into determining who's the best? Because when you look at heavyweight boxing, you had Tyson Fury, you had Anthony Joshua in there. Now you got Daniel Dubois coming up, and now you got Moses Utamu, and then you have Fabio Wardley coming up the ranks, right? So heavyweight boxing in UK right now is red hot. So to sit there and just not acknowledge that and dismiss that, it's crazy. So does it really matter, like where the fighters come from? Why is that even a determining factor in someone's resume? So right then and there, I had to call that guy out on Twitter, because that's just like absurd. You have a right to your own opinion, but I'm going to critique your opinion, and I think that is kind of crazy. So then shout out to my man Calix Boxing. He's talking about activity, and there's this quote unquote hashtag activity matters, and it started by Steve Kim. And there's a lot of people who subscribe to that notion of the activity matters. Yeah, okay. But it's easy to have a lot of fights if you're blowing guys out in 4 or 5 rounds, and if you're in a lower weight class, you're not going to make as much money as someone who's in a bigger weight class. So obviously, the incentive to fight more is there, where it's less incentivized for a guy at heavyweight. If he's going to make $40 million in one fight, there's no rush to really get back in there. And I know you've mentioned this, and D Styles also mentioned this. When you're bigger and you're fighting bigger guys, you're taking more damage, right? Which Usyk is definitely doing. And you also mentioned the physiological standpoint, where if you're a bigger guy, you're carrying much weight.
More wear and tear on the joints, on the ligaments. You're going to need
100%.
you're going to need longer recovery time. It's like high school physiology and anatomy, or at least it used to be. Not so much, but you need to
Yeah,
pass those classes in the 12th grade to go to college
of course.
and be a phys ed teacher.
And then this whole thing about going back to the golden era, where everyone was active, and but if you go back and you just look at the heavyweight division over the years, and you do the math, and you want to average out how many fights heavyweights had a year, well, if you were to do Usyk's average, he over his career, he has averaged 2 fights a year, but and this year he had 2 fights, but there was a little stretch where we only had 1 fight a year. And if you average out Lennox Lewis, he averaged 3 fights a year, but in his last 2 years of his career, he only fought once in each of those years. So every heavyweight will probably have like a dry spell, but if you just do the math, on average, a heavyweight fighter has had 2 to 3 fights a year. So this notion that guys were fighting 4 or 5 times a year when they got to that championship level, it's just not true. So I just think people really need to look and be objective and look at the data and represent the data accurately, and coming up with statistics that are irrelevant just to try to make a point. I don't think that makes much sense either. So that's just my take on it. So Usyk may not have had as many fights as Inoue in recent years, but once again, when you factor in the level of opposition, you factor in the difficulty of the fights, you factor in the wear and tear, and you factor in the length of the fights. I mean, that matters to me. So I'm not going to just go quantity over quality. I'm not saying Inoue, his resume is horrible, but it pales in comparison, in my opinion, to Alexander Usyk's when you talk about level of difficulty. His path to undisputed, in my opinion, was much tougher than Inoue's. Now, is that Inoue's fault that he hasn't had the greatest guys in his division? He's had some solid guys, but he's always been an overwhelming favorite in just about everyone he's fought, where Usyk's been the underdog a few times. He's been in 50-50 fights. So that's definitely a reflection of the level of opposition in comparison to the two men. Now, Inoue is going to have to get creative. He's going to have to bring a Nakatani up to get a competitive fight. He may have to go up to 126, right, to challenge himself more and be in some riskier fights and some fights that don't have predictable outcomes. Well, but why does he have to do? Listen, why did Usyk have to do it? Like Usyk is going against the grain. He's fighting guys regularly 20, 30, 40, sometimes 50 pounds heavier than him. And that's never going to change. He's not a small heavyweight in terms of history, but in terms of this era, he's not a huge heavyweight, right? He's not a big guy. So should he get credit for being undersized and overachieving? So people want to say, oh, why does Inoue have to go up to 126? He's not a real this, he's not a real that. Well, again, Usyk did it, right? Usyk has really challenged himself. He's fought guys significantly bigger than him. So why is it a stretch to ask for Inoue to fight a guy who's 4 pounds heavier than him? When people
Pop quiz, Joe.
people want to
go.
people
go.
want to be overly critical of, oh, why does he have to move up in weight just to challenge himself when he's not a real quote unquote featherweight? Okay, is it more difficult moving up 4 pounds, or is it more difficult fighting someone who outweighs you by 40 pounds? So you do the math there, Maestro. I'm sorry.
Well, I am going to do the math really quickly. I mean, let's just we'll make it very simple for people. 20%, right, of 100 is 20, right? 20% of 200 is what, Joe?
20% of 200 is going to be it's going to be 40 pounds.
40, exactly. So roughly, right? If you look at what Alexander Usyk did, I mean, he's taking on guys much more than 20% bigger than him, right? You can't really say the same thing about Inoue, which is fine, because I want to make my point on pound for pound very clear so that everybody knows how I view pound for pound. I've said this before on my own channel. I've debated people on this particular topic in the past. I don't do Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. I don't do, well, if we whittled Usyk down to 122 pounds, Naoya Inoue would beat him. That's not what pound for pound is to me. Pound for pound is when you're comparing the accomplishments and performances in the ring of a fighter in one division and comparing that to the accomplishments and performances in the ring to another fighter in another division, right? I'm not going to do, well, if a bird was the size of a cockroach, the cockroach would win in a fight. I don't understand the significance of thinking about these lists in that way, but I've had arguments with people, Joe, that want to do that kind of comparison. What is your thought? Let's define pound for pound. I defined it for me. What is pound for pound for you?
I would have to echo your sentiments, and I'll tell you something else, Maestro. Let's just speak hypothetically. So if Mike Tyson wasn't 5'10" or 5'9" and didn't have the reach that he had, would he fight in the same style? So basically, your size and physical dimensions dictates somewhat how you're going to fight. So if you were to shrink someone down, if Tyson Fury was not as big as he was, would he fight in the same way? Obviously, if you have certain physical advantages or you have a certain dimension to you, you're going to have to tailor your style based on your physical dimensions. So if guys were the same size, they necessarily wouldn't have the same styles. If Bernard Hopkins was the size of Marvin Hagler, right, would he fight the same way, right? So that's how you have to also factor in, well, what if everyone was the same size? Well, again, if everyone was the same size, does that mean that they would fight in a similar way, right? So again, you size matters not only in a situation where you can use it for strength, right? Size matters if you have long arms, right? And you have reach over someone, you're going to fight that particular person possibly on the outside. Most shorter fighters are inside fighters. And in order to get themselves on the inside, they rely on head movement, they rely on feints. Most of those short, stocky guys are fast, twitchy, explosive guys, and they tend to have quick feet so they can maneuver and maybe guys with longer reach and have great jabs have a hard time timing them coming in because of that. So again, not to belabor the point, but your size determines to a great degree, for the most part, what your style is going to be. And if you were smaller or bigger, obviously, I would suspect strongly that your style would change.
I agree. And here's the thing, because Team Batman Boxing, salute to you, brother. He says, to be fair, no one. To be fair, though, it is Inoue's fourth weight class. But to me, there's no right or wrong answer either way. So many variables. Here's the thing with that. It's his fourth weight class, right? But you go 108 to 112. That's a 4-pound difference. This is where boxing doesn't even make sense with the weight classes. 108 to 112, there's a 4-pound difference, right? 112 to 115, that's a 3-pound weight difference. Why did the weight division gap become smaller when you go further up? Doesn't make sense. Then you have 115 to 118, that's 3 pounds. Then you have 118 to 122. Now we're back to 4 pounds. Then you have 122 to 126, 4 pounds again. Then you have 126 to 130, 4 pounds. Then 130 to 135. Now we go to 5 pounds. Then we go 135 to 140. We're at 5 pounds again. Then we go up to 7 when we do the jump of 140 to 147, et cetera, et cetera. Look, that would be the equivalent, because Usyk started his professional career at 200 pounds. Just if you just go off of the extrapolating kind of the differences in the weight there should, if there were divisions at 200, right? Then let's say at 212, right? Then another one at 225, then another one at 240. Usyk would have cleaned out those divisions as well. Unfortunately for Usyk, that you go from 200, and then the next weight class, there's no limit at all, unless you're including bridger weight, which was introduced, but which almost no one pays any attention to. The fact that he's done the quote unquote multiple divisions, if you're comparing accomplishments, shouldn't really matter when you're talking about Usyk, because Usyk does not have the liberty of jumping up 8 pounds, 10 pounds, 12 pounds in weight and going to a new division. No, he's got to jump up an unlimited amount of weight. So you can't compare the multiple weight divisions once you're talking about guys, I would say, probably starting at like super middleweight. And I'll tell you why. 160 to 168, right? That's an 8-pound gap. Joe, explain to me why we go from 168 to 175 and it goes back down to what is that, a 7-pound gap? Why does the gap get smaller? Why is the gap smaller between 168 and 175 than it is between 160 and 168? There's no rhyme or reason to these weight divisions. And, I'll give you a certain amount of credit if you're comparing it to guys in and around the same weight divisions. But once you get past 160 pounds, at that point, being a 4-division, 5-division champion, like that that doesn't detract from your accomplishments and your greatness. Thoughts, Joe, because I went on a bit of a rant there.
Let's look at history. How many cruiserweight champions in the history of the sport have become heavyweight champions? To my knowledge, and if anyone, please correct me if I'm wrong, Evander Holyfield, David Haye, and Alexander Usyk. So that's only 3. And the cruiserweight division has been around since 1979, right? So in all of that time, only 3 cruiserweights have been able to move up to heavyweight and become champion. And to my knowledge, only 2 of them were undisputed in both divisions, which is Holyfield and Usyk. So Usyk did something only one other man has ever done And it was done, what, how many years ago? Was when did Holyfield became? In 1990 is when Holyfield became undisputed heavyweight champion when he knocked out Buster Douglas in 2 rounds. So do the math. That's like 35 years ago. That was the last time that what Usyk does was accomplished, right? So again, no disrespect to Inoue, he can only beat who's in front of him. But objectively speaking, the accomplishment from Usyk is much greater, in my opinion. It's just much greater, in my opinion, based off of history, because it's what Usyk has been able to do was done only one other time, and that was Holyfield. And then people will say this, Maestro, oh, well, that's the 3 belt era, the 2 belt era. It's the belts have watered down the division. That's great. I agree with you. But it's still harder with all the politics and all of the ratings and this and that. It's harder to unify with the 4 belts than it is obviously with the 2 belts and the 3 belts. So you have to fight another champion. Now you can argue, well, because there's 4 champions, those 4 fighters or those 3 fighters that you have to fight aren't as good as the other, whatever. But there's always going to be a 1, 2, and 3. So you still have to go through number 2, and then you got to go through number 3, and then you got to go through number 4.
I mean,
There's 3 fights you have to fight.
I agree. And what Usyk was able to do in terms of facing off against someone, or actually I would say multiple people with that kind of a size advantage, with all due respect to Crawford, who I like a lot, with all due respect to Inoue, who I like a lot, when were they ever in against guys facing that kind of a size disadvantage?
Let me just
I can't remember fights like that. Usyk faced a significant size disadvantage against Derek Chisora. He faced a significant size advantage twice against AJ. He faced a significant size advantage against Daniel Dynamite Dubois. He faced a significant size advantage twice against Tyson Fury. And I would add, he was never an overwhelming favorite to the extent that Crawford has been and Inoue has been in pretty much any one of those fights. Joe, go for it. You wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I don't want to nitpick here, but Fight Doctor said Michael Moore came up from light heavyweight to claim the heavyweight title, and so did Michael Spinks. My statement was, name someone who was undisputed at cruiserweight and who was also undisputed at heavyweight. Neither one of them men were undisputed at heavyweight, number one. And I don't want to diminish Michael Moore in any way, but when he was the WBO light heavyweight champion, that at that time the WBO wasn't even recognized as a major title.
WBO was what the IBO is today, essentially.
Correct.
Let's be honest.
I don't want to disrespect Michael Moore. I still think he was he's an excellent light heavyweight. But at the time he was the WBO champion, it wasn't recognized as a major title. But what Michael Spinks did obviously was very incredible. But he was never undisputed, and he had people criticize Usyk for only having a handful of fights at heavyweight. Michael Spinks had even less than Usyk at heavyweight. So again, the statistic was name another fighter that was undisputed at cruiserweight and heavyweight, and there's only been 2, and that's Holyfield and Usyk. Because even David Haye, he only had 3 titles at cruiserweight. Well, I shouldn't say only, but he had 3 titles at cruiserweight and only had 1 title at heavyweight. Right. So again, that's the other statistic.
The other thing I would add, and I don't know how many people have been to any Terrence Crawford fights live. I've been to a number of Terrence Crawford fights live, including Terrence Crawford's last fight, which I traveled all the way out to California to go watch. Salute to my cousin Janelle for hosting me in her apartment there and supporting the channel. By the way, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, consider joining the channel here to support my brother Joe Habib. He didn't really impress. Let's just put it that way. It wasn't a dominating performance against Madrimov. It was a very close fight. Now, people could say, well, I've heard Tim Bradley say this. Well, Madrimov didn't throw a lot of punches. There weren't a lot of openings there for Crawford. Uh, that may be true. But the fact is, he didn't destroy Madrimov the way that a lot of people would expect a pound for pound fighter to dispatch of an opponent. Now, Madrimov is a really good fighter, but he's also a fighter who at that time, I think he had 14 fights, Joe?
Yep.
So
Once again,
you went nip and tuck with a guy with 14 fights. I mean, I'm not disrespecting the dude.
not
He cleaned out
disrespecting
the
him either.
welterweight division. It was his first fight in the new division, but it was a less than dominating performance against the guy who essentially had 14 professional fights off the top of my head. I may be off by a fight or two there. That's number one. Number two, a lot of these pound for pound lists are all over the place. I see people here in the chat giving credit to Bam and wondering why Bam isn't included on these lists. Well, some people do include Bam. I'm going to go right here to a list by a podcast that some of you guys may not be that familiar with. Vinny Paz out of Philly, Jedi Mind Tricks, one of the underground hip hop legends. He's got a show with a guy named Brandon Long. This is their pound for pound list. Alexander Usyk, number 1. Naoya Inoue, number 2. Bam Rodriguez, number 3. Then Bud Crawford. Artur Beterbiev, number 5. Dimitri Bivol, number 6. Shakur Stevenson, number 7. Junto Nakatani, number 8. Canelo Alvarez, number 9. And Oscar Collazo, number 10. So that's their list. ESPN, well, they have their own ideas. ESPN does. ESPN's list, if we go to it, they have, if I go down to it, Usyk number 1, Crawford number 2, Inoue number 3, then Beterbiev, then Canelo number 5, Dimitri Bivol number 6, even though he beat Canelo. That's quite interesting. Jesse Bam Rodriguez number 7, Gervonta Davis. I don't know how he's on anybody's pound for pound list if you're going off of accomplishment. Number 8. You go down, they've got Shakur Stevenson number 10, and then Junto Nakatani. Shakur number 9, Junto Nakatani number 10. Last but not least, they are the quote unquote Bible of boxing. So I'm going to include their list as well here, Joe. Their pound for pound list has Usyk number 1, Naoya Inoue number 2, Crawford number 3, Beterbiev 4, Bivol 5, Bam 6, Saul 7, Gervonta Davis 8, Junto Nakatani 9, and believe it or not, Devin Haney number 10. So it's funny that I'm actually more in agreement, Joe, believe it or not, with a hip hop legend in Vinny Paz and his list than I am with either ESPN or the Ring Magazine. Your thoughts?
Well, yeah, that's crazy, and I agree with you. But let's go back to the Crawford Madrimov fight, right? I did say it would be a tough fight. I thought Crawford would win. I did not think Crawford would knock out Madrimov. Was the fight more competitive than I anticipated? A bit. I thought Crawford would probably win 8-4. He won 7-5. Some people had the fight a draw. Some people even think Madrimov eked it out, right? But let's keep this in context. And people, they never want to factor this in, and they always want to dismiss this. But let's look at the odds. Crawford was a minus 750 versus Madrimov, and Madrimov was a plus 550. So Crawford was basically a 6-1 favorite over Madrimov. So if this was such a 50-50 fight, and that like everyone wants to say now, everyone wants to everyone's like trying to Monday morning quarterback this and like, oh yeah, I knew this would be like a very close fight. I thought it would be a competitive fight. I didn't think it would be as close as it was. And if everyone really were true to what they're saying now, then the odds wouldn't have been what they were. The odds are a reflection of the public perception, right? And the odds did not move. Like this was not a 2-1. Like when Fury fought Usyk in the rematch, it was like even Usyk was like a minus 145. Fury was like a plus 125. Like that's That's a razor close fight on paper. This on paper was not a razor close fight as it played out to be. It was anything but. So, oh, the odds don't matter. What do you care about this, that, and the odds do matter because the odds are a reflection of public perception. And everyone wants to
So they're
Monday morning
also
quarterback. Everyone wants to Monday morning quarterback, the Sunday after the fight. But these are the people that are always sitting on the fence or don't even say anything on Friday night.
Can I also add into what you're saying there? The odds are also a reflection of the casinos essentially making profits off of people's bookie sheets. So casinos aren't in the business of losing money. Casinos are in the business of making money, a lot of money. And whenever you see those odds, those are the odds that literally professional experts whose jobs it is to make casinos money through sports betting have put out there. Go for it, Joe.
Well, they look at metrics. They look at data. They look at the performances. They look at how fighters have performed. Like they don't just pick these numbers out of a hat. There's a method to the madness here, right? Oh, the odds are wrong sometimes. Yeah, but they're not wrong often. They're not wrong often. Okay? Because if they were wrong often, then casinos would be out of business. It's that simple.
Yeah,
That's
100%. So look, let's get right into it, Joe. Uh we put the topic out there. Who do you got? Inoue, Usyk, Crawford? Are we missing anybody here on this thumbnail? Like what's your top 3 and why?
again. I don't want to be evasive here. I don't want to duck your question. I only care about who's number one, and for me, you know who number one is? Alexander Usyk. I don't want to be disrespectful. I don't even think it's close. Now, if you want to have Inoue in the conversation, but I can only give you my opinion based off of level of opposition and the difficulty of these fights, and just the accomplishments on their own. I already explained. There's only one other fighter in the history of the cruiserweight division that moved up to heavyweight and became undisputed at cruiserweight and became undisputed at heavyweight, and that is Evander Holyfield. So it's only been done one other time in the last 35 years, right? Since the existence of the cruiserweight division 35 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I, um, I just don't even think it's close.
I actually agree with you 100%. I don't think it's close. You look at the accomplishments as an amateur fighter. I know it's a different sport, but
Excuse me.
I do have to include that. You look at the World Boxing Super Series. You look at Undisputed as cruiserweight. You look at the fact that he stepped up and took on all of the guys, other than the quote unquote U.S. heavyweights. I guess to get credit in the United States, you got to beat Deontay Wilder, right? I don't
Yeah.
know. We're gonna get into the state of U.S. heavyweight boxing in hour number 2, but yeah, for me, it's clearly him. I would actually give the nod to Inoue over Crawford for number 2. Um, and yeah, I'd put Crawford at number 3 if I'm going to round
Yeah.
out. I tell you who wouldn't be on my list: Gervonta Tank Davis. And
No, Devin
no
Haney wouldn't be
disrespect
on
to
my
Devin
list
Haney.
either.
No disrespect to
Sorry.
Devin Haney. He
Sorry.
wouldn't be on my list either.
No,
He
no.
would not be on my list. I'm
I'm
sorry.
sorry.
Go
Yeah.
for it, Joe.
Yeah, I was going to say, so the last time that was done was 35 years ago, and the division, and even for Holyfield, it was a great accomplishment. And I'll tell you why, because the cruiserweight division has been around for 45 years. And Holyfield, for 10 years, no one did it. And then Holyfield came along and did it. So when Holyfield did it, it was very impressive as well, too. Because even though the division was young, it was only 10 years old at the time when Holyfield did it. It was still a monumental accomplishment because Holyfield was even smaller than Usyk, when he moved up. Like he was like 205 pounds. And then as time grew on, there was a couple fights he was like 215ish, but I would argue, Holyfield maybe about the same height, maybe have a little bit longer reach, comparable reach to Usyk, but he was a little lighter. He was a little lighter. So, but he fought Riddick Bowe, who was about 235 ish. He never fought somebody. Well, he did fight Nikolai Valuev, but there's an asterisk next to that one. Like Nikolai Valuev is not as skilled as Tyson Fury. So you got a guy in Tyson
Kind of a
Fury.
man.
Yeah, you got a guy in Tyson Fury who's like, I think, 262 is the optimum weight. So you got a guy who's 6'9", 262, and highly skilled. So, it is what it is.
Yeah, look, Fight Doctor is out there saying, I'd love for Fight Doctor to come on and explain himself. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, Fight Doctor. Of course, I respect you a lot, but I don't understand the statement that for some reason you seem to think that Usyk's resume is overrated. Look, I use the word overrated.
Well,
I like to use the word appropriately.
again,
I've been accused of hate because I say Triple G's overrated or I say Mike Tyson's overrated. I'm not saying they're bad fighters. I'm not even saying they're not great fighters. I just think that people overrate what they did in the ring. I don't think that applies to Usyk. Joe, go
well,
for it.
I'm going to ask you a great question, and I'm going to ask anyone in the chat this same great question, and I'm going to ask Fight Doctor this great question. What is a better win? Usyk becoming undisputed fighting Tyson Fury, or Evander Holyfield becoming undisputed fighting Buster Douglas? What's a greater win there, Maestro?
I would say Usyk over Fury.
Thank you. I don't even think it's close.
I don't even think it's close,
So,
to be honest with you.
you know,
Look, let's look at his record in reverse order. Tyson Fury twice, Daniel Dubois, Anthony Joshua twice, Derek Chisora, Chaz Witherspoon. That's his heavyweight run. Who has a better record in the heavyweight division than that? I don't know anyone that does right now. And you compare that to Crawford's record. What has Crawford done in his last few fights that's more impressive than Fury twice, Daniel Dubois, Anthony Joshua twice, Derek Chisora, and that's just heavyweight. But before that, you've got Bellew, Gasayev, Bradis, Huck, Hunter. I mean, even Christoph Glowacki. I'm sorry, that's the best run I've ever seen at cruiserweight.
well,
That's the best run I've ever seen in the cruiserweight division. Joe, go for it.
Now, people are asking, well, who is Usyk beaten? He beat Joshua twice. He beat Fury twice. And that win over Daniel Dubois is starting to age really well. So then we could say the same thing about Mike Tyson. Like, we could pick apart anyone's resume if we really want to. It's hard to pick apart Evander Holyfield's resume. It's hard to pick apart Lennox Lewis's resume. And it's hard to pick apart like Muhammad Ali's resume. But again, we could pick apart Rocky Marciano's resume. So if you look at history, and this is just my opinion, and most people will agree, you had two golden eras in heavyweight history, 70s and the 90s. When Tyson's era was not particularly strong, Vladimir Klitschko's era was not particularly strong, Rocky Marciano's era was not particularly strong, and arguably some people don't even think Joe Louis's era was particularly strong, as blasphemous as that may sound to some. But he did have what was called I hate using this word, but he had the bum of the month club, right? So I hate using that word, and I don't mean to diminish any fighter, but that's what was put out there back in his day, right? So again, based off of history, is Usyk in the comparable to that same era of Muhammad Ali, comparable to that era when it was Holyfield, Lennox Lewis, Riddick Bowe, Mike Tyson, David Tua, Michael Moore. You can go down the list in that era. Chris Bird was pretty solid. Like that 90s era was a very good era, right? George Foreman had that renaissance in the 90s, became heavyweight champion again, knocking out Michael Moore. So this is not that.
So I do want to respond to this here, Joe, because you're absolutely right. It's not that. But look, I see this comment here. I'm going to respond to it. Essentially, it says now a victory over Joshua is great when Maestro constantly shits on Joshua and devalues his resume. Uh, I never said a single victory over Anthony Joshua was great. And actually, the victory over Joshua did take place after Joshua had already been destroyed by none other than Andy Ruiz Jr. But here's the thing: he beat Joshua twice. He beat Joshua in England, right? He then did it on Saudi soil, which was essentially a UK run event, UK run uh, commission, etc. But I didn't just include Joshua; I included Fury twice, and I included Derek Chisora. So it's not just one victory over Anthony Joshua. That's number one. Number two is you can only fight who is in your division at the time. And yes, those names are who was in Usyk's division at the time. That's number two. All right. Number three is we're not just looking at this in abstract, we're looking at it and comparing it to the accomplishments of Terrence Bud Crawford or the accomplishments of Naoya Inoue. And if we're looking at Crawford's record, he beat Errol Spence Jr., right? He beat Sean Porter. He beat Kell Brook. He beat who he beat in the welterweight division. I don't think that those wins are more impressive than the wins I just outlined uh, for Usyk in the heavyweight division. Nor do I think that Naoya Inoue's wins, as great as they were against a guy like Nonito Donaire or the other opponents that he beat, I am rating the fact that uh, Usyk went up in weight so drastically and beat these guys, which is the final point. The point is, Usyk did this essentially as a cruiserweight. He wasn't a heavyweight boxer. So you want me to say that I said what I said about Joshua in the past? I still say that. The win against Charles Martin is probably the weakest win for a heavyweight title that I can think of uh, since I've been watching boxing. I can't think of a weaker win to win a heavyweight title than beating Prince Charles Martin. I also think that when he fought uh, Joseph Parker, that there was home cooked refereeing in that fight. Call me crazy. I don't think the referee allowed Joseph Parker to get busy on the inside, which was his only real shot at that time, given how Joseph Parker was fighting back then, to do any significant damage on Anthony Joshua. I also thought that the fight against Carlos Takam was stopped prematurely. And lastly, I was the fight took place here in New York City. He got absolutely destroyed by Andy Ruiz Jr. here in MSG. So everything I've said about AJ to me has been accurate and
Yeah,
fair.
but
You can disagree with it, but it's fine. But here's the thing: AJ's a legit, solid heavyweight in terms of his size, in terms of how he fights. Usyk was not that when he went up to fight him. He was a cruiserweight moving up in weight. Joe, take it over.
yeah, so you know, being overrated does not mean you're not good. Like if you're in the top 4 or 5 in your class, but you lie on a resume and say you were top one, you overrated yourself. It doesn't mean you suck. It doesn't mean you're not good. I want to answer another question from Fight Doctor. He says, "What's more impressive, Usyk beating Fury or Holyfield beating Bo?" I'm going to say again, Usyk beating Fury to me is more impressive than Holyfield beating Bo. I mean, Fury beat him twice. Holyfield lost to Bo the first time. And again, I like Riddick Bowe, but Riddick Bowe lost to Holyfield, right? And he was on his way to losing to Galata twice before Galata got disqualified. And Riddick Bowe never fought Lennox Lewis. And Lennox Lewis wanted to fight him, and Riddick Bowe threw the WBC belt in the trash
We did.
and avoided the fight. And I love Riddick Bowe, but
It's funny how we're having me too. It's funny how Riddick Big Daddy Bo out of Brooklyn, New York. It's Rock Newman used to be his manager, who I always found entertaining.
besides
To this day, Rock Newman calls himself a black man, which I find very interesting.
besides
But
besides Holyfield, who is Riddick Bowe beat?
Well, here I'm going to answer
Who
this
is Riddick Bowe beat? Who is Riddick Bowe beat besides Holyfield? I mean,
Andrew Golota by Low Blows.
we could do this game, play this game all day. Like we could easily pick apart resumes.
But here, I want to respond to Tony P right here, and it's very interesting that we're already talking heavyweights because we're going to be getting into a heavyweight discussion, specifically the fact that heavyweight boxing in the U.S. seems to be totally dead. Right, we're going to talk about that in the second hour of the show, so stay tuned for that. But I do want to talk about here Daniel Dubois because I'm guessing Tony Pugilist is saying this in response to me talking about AJ's win over Prince Charles Martin. Call me crazy. I think that beating Filip Hrgović, an undefeated Filip Hrgović, is a bigger win than beating Prince Charles Martin. Call me crazy. I think it's a bigger, more impressive win. I'm sorry.
Once
Tony,
again,
you agree with me, but I think that Hrgović is a better fighter than Prince Charles Martin. And I like Prince Charles. I met him in person. I think Hrgović is a better fighter.
well, once again, Daniel Dubois, 4-1 underdog against Hrgović, 4-1 underdog against Anthony Joshua. If people had this opinion before those two fights, why were the odds so wide? Again, we're doing revisionist history after the fact. I don't want to hear, oh, Wilder was garbage, he's this, he's that. But the same people that are saying that were picking him to beat Fury in the first two fights. So you can't have it both ways. You can't Monday morning quarterback and play revisionist history. You know? What the perception was at the time of the fight was what the perception was.
So Hannibal, a big up to you, bro. Love the name. By the way, Amilcar is the name of actually Hannibal's father. So you can look that up. So we have that in common. But I'm looking at this list. I just don't understand it. And I love Better Beef. Don't get me wrong. You could make a case for Better Beef being number 3, but I don't see how you can make a case for number 1 Bud, number 2 Inoue, and not have Usyk on the list. Trust me, no one is. Maybe it's all of the pro-Ukrainiac propaganda that's out there all over YouTube, and you don't like that stuff. I don't particularly like that stuff either. I didn't particularly like the banners he was throwing out there before the win against Fury in the rematch, but I have to remove the politics stuff and my own biases about that when I'm looking at ranking these guys. I can't make a case for that list. Can you make a case, Joe? Go for it.
I gotta ask you another question, and I wish Fight Doctor jumped on here because this is a great discussion. How can Holyfield be how could he be an all-time great when I would argue Lennox Lewis was the best of the era? Holyfield and Lennox Lewis were in the same era, and I believe Lennox Lewis was the best heavyweight of that era. So I think Holyfield is a great fighter. But would you call Holyfield an all-time great at heavyweight?
I would not.
I would say Lennox Lewis is an all-time great at heavyweight. I would not say Holyfield was. I would say
his claim to fame as a heavyweight, I guess, is beating Buster Douglas, right?
And beating Riddick Bowe,
beating
and Mike
Riddick
Tyson,
Bowe, and beating a post-prison stint, Mike Tyson, who was like very. I keep saying this, Mike. To me, when you look at that generation of heavyweights, and people still tell me to this day, "Oh, Maestro, Lennox Lewis only beat Mike Tyson because Mike Tyson was way past his prime at that time."
Mike Tyson has had the shortest prime in the history of any sport I've ever seen. The guy turned pro in 1986, and I love Mike Tyson. This is not disrespectful. He turned pro in 1986, and then everyone was saying he was done after he lost to Buster Douglas in 1990. Everyone said he was done. So the guy, basically, what you're telling me is the guy had a 4-year prime. Like, who has a 4-year prime in any sport? Like,
I don't know anybody
if you're done in 4 years, then what does that even mean?
I mean, the only person that comes to mind for those of you who follow tennis is Michael Chang, who won the U.S. Open as a teenager and then retired very young, felt burnt out from the sport because he started it so young. But even his prime was longer than 4 years, I think. I mean, I literally I can't think of anybody else. Maybe there's like some gymnasts out there or something that I don't know about, but
Unless you've
very,
gotten
very
injured,
short prime.
unless you've gotten injured early in your career, then I can see how your prime has been shortened. But after Mike Tyson lost to Buster Douglas, everyone's like, oh, like that's like post Buster Douglas. There's like 2 careers of Mike Tyson, and like people are saying like the guy only had like a 4 year prime basically.
I mean, the prime that I've been told, literally on shows that I've done by people that tune into our shows, is his prime pretty much ended when Customato died. Customato died, and Mike Tyson fell apart and couldn't handle it, and then his life started to spiral, and then Robin Givens was a distraction, and all of the leeches, the hangers on were a distraction, and you know so I mean, I don't know how old he was when Customato died. I remember looking it up at the time, but I think he was like 22, 23, maybe 24 years old at the most. So I I don't know. I
Well, when Customato died, he was younger than that because
so yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. So I literally had somebody tell me, "Well, yeah, his prime ended when Cuss died." And I'm like, "Well, if that's the case, then I mean, what are we talking about?" Well, Fight Doctor is saying his prime ended when Kevin Rooney left. Do me a favor, Fight Doctor. Just tell us what year that was when Kenny Rooney left, because I honestly don't know. I really don't. But regardless, it would place his prime as ending in his early 20s. Can you name another heavyweight whose prime ended in his early 20s, Joe?
no, no,
You
I
know,
can't.
Not Floyd Patterson, not Muhammad Ali. Like, I can't think of any heavyweights whose
Mike
prime.
Tyson. Mike Tyson was 19 years old when Customato died, and then he turned 20. He was like 20 years old. I think he was 20 years old when he became heavyweight champion. How old was Mike Tyson? I think he was 20.
He was 20.
Yeah. He was 20 years old, the youngest heavyweight champion. So Customato died when he was 19 years old. So
So Kevin Rooney was fired by Mike Tyson in 1998. So that's the year that we got to use for calculating the end of Mike Tyson's prime, according to Fight Doctor. So 1998, right?
yeah, but people were saying that even when Kevin Rooney was there, he wasn't listening to anybody because he was still out Like so during the Buster Douglas fight, regardless of whether Kevin Rooney was training him or not, he basically admitted that he didn't train for the fight. He didn't care. He was partying. He didn't know how to deal with being heavyweight champion. The fame came too quick. And again, I'm not dumping on the guy. I mean, it's a legitimate, happens to many people. But that was all going on when Kevin Rooney was still there. He was kind of spiraling out of control, getting in car accidents, being arrested for trashing hotel rooms, having issues with his wife, Robin Givens, and so this is when Kevin Rooney was still there. So I hear people say, oh, after he lost to Buster Douglas and he lost the aura of invincibility, he was never the same. So essentially, people are telling me that his prime ended after Buster Douglas. A lot of people tell me that. A lot of people.
Yeah. So and those same people will discount the fact that Lennox Lewis beat him and use that as an excuse. So it just seems like there's always an excuse there.
And Lennox Lewis is older than Mike Tyson.
Yeah, he is, which is
Lennox
something
Lewis
that I
was a
pointed
gold
out
medalist.
which is something that I pointed out many times to people who make that argument, but they just don't want to hear it, Joe. They just don't want to hear it. So, and when that's the case, I mean, there's not really much you can do.
Tyson was in decline before the Douglas fight. So then now you're telling me his prime was even shorter than 4 years. Like again, like how does a fighter with no injuries only have a 4 year prime?
But I got to say something else too. Like, being disciplined is a very big part of being an athlete. I
Yeah.
mean, how many guys, street ball legends? I'm sure there are a lot too in Boston. I mean, they're all over all major cities. Whether it's New York, Boston, L.A., Toronto, Chicago, hooping it up, right? But they're they're not disciplined, so they never make it to Division 1 college sports. They never make it to the NBA. Do we count these guys at all as all-time greats? I mean, discipline is part of being a great athlete. I mean, I don't want to hear that as an excuse of, well, he would have been better than Lennox if he was disciplined. He would have been better than Lennox if he didn't marry Robin Givens. He would have been better than Lennox if he wasn't giving out Mercedes Benzes to everyone and admitted by his own admission. This isn't me saying it. This is him saying it. Using all kind of illicit substances recreationally. That's not Lennox's fault.
Yeah.
So, anyways, let's circle back to the beginning here, Joe, as we close out hour number 1 and before we get into hour number 2. Which is specifically going to be on the U.S. heavyweight boxing scene. For those of you who are interested, we're going to talk about essentially the death and demise of heavyweight boxing here in the U.S. on a number of levels. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about the current state of boxing journalism here in the U.S. right now as well. There was literally a fist fight yesterday at a press event in Las Vegas before a card there. Between a member of the media, quote unquote, and a fighter's entourage. So we're going to talk a little bit about those two things in a moment in hour number 2. So go for it, Joe.
Yeah. I mean, again, this is not the heavyweight division of the 70s. It's not the heavyweight division of the 90s. And I did a video, want to say a couple of years ago, and I looked at the top 10 heavyweights in the 90s. And I think there was like 7 or 8 of them were American. And then I fast forward to today, and there's not one American in there. So again, just my opinion, I think there's a lot of anti European bias, a lot of anti bias towards fighters who aren't American. And I think people are really salty that what happened to the heavyweight division, over the years, and how we have no great heavyweights anymore. I don't. You can attribute that to several things, but it is what it is, and I think there's a backlash because of that, and people just can't deal with reality. As much as I love this country, I have to say right now, we are in decline when it comes to having great heavyweights in boxing. So we're going to talk about that in the next hour, and I'm looking forward to it.
There you go. So everyone, last reminder, do the channel a favor. All right, you don't get content like this everywhere across YouTube. Trust me, I'm in the YouTube algorithm. I get a lot of trash coming through my algorithm when it comes to boxing. Joe's got one of the best channels out there.
Thank you.
That is not even in dispute. Flagship show drops every Sunday. That's 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. It's late night boxing talk if you're out there London time, 11 p.m. London time. All right, you want to tune into that every Sunday. It's Joe, it's Eric. It's one of the best pairings out there. It's one of the best channels out there. It's one of the best shows out there. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Consider hitting that join button too. Guys, it's like what, a cup of coffee a month, and you're supporting all of the content. Joe's got well over 4,000 subs. If everyone dropped a couple dollars a month, this channel would be running on Chinese high-speed rail type levels. All right, so consider just joining. It's not a lot. Everybody out there, I know you've got $2 to spare a month. All right, think about all of the stuff you spend money on a day-to-day basis, and then think about the quality that's being given to you on this channel, Ringside Reporter Live, on a weekly basis. So support the channel. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit that notification bell and tune in for Eric and Joe every Sunday night. Joe, go for it.
Yeah, we'll be back tomorrow. We'll be broadcasting live at 12 p.m. Eastern time. because of the NFL playoffs. So make sure you guys check us out, and this will be a little treat for you guys over in the UK. You get to watch us in prime time for a change.
There you go. And go over to my channel for hour number 2. I put the link in the chat there. If you're watching on demand, Joe's going to make sure that the link to hour number 2 is in the description box of this video. And of course, if you're going to be watching hour number 2, the link to this video is going to be in the description box over there. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you on the next one. Take care.